Okay, so on my last video, I said I was going to cover this case of forgotten history, and today it's about the only time in American history where a government was completely overthrown. And you might not have heard of this case because it happened in the 1800s, and the government in time was a black government. It was city council, or the whole city council got pretty much taken out. So I'm gonna play this Vox video that summarizes it, and I'll give you some details as I play it.
For a long time, if you went to the library in Wilmington, North Carolina, there was one thing you weren't allowed to research.
We were refused. We were rejected by the librarian.
When I asked about or inquired about 1898, they wanted to know why.
I was told that yes, they had something, but they kept it under lock and key.
The story of Wilmington in 1898 still isn't widely known.
What happened here in what's now just this empty patch of grass would radically change racial politics in North Carolina.
And I'm gonna say the only reason I know about this is because of YouTube, because I'm somewhat of a historian, and I'm always looking for new history, and when I find something like this, I want to share it with either my subscribers or anyone who might be interested in it.
This is the story of an American election, but also of something we don't usually find in American history: the violent overthrow of a democratically elected government. In the late 1800s, Wilmington, North Carolina was the state's largest city. It had a majority black population, and historians today describe it as a rarity in the post-Civil War American South.
Wilmington, prior to November 1898, was what the New South could be at the cusp of the 20th century.
There was an unusual degree of black prosperity.
In Wilmington, there were successful black entrepreneurs, doctors, teachers, but also black elected officials. And for a time, that was true throughout the state.
And I'm gonna pause real quick. And this is when I hear the argument, how come there are no black cities that are highly successful or in the United States? And I talked about Black Wall Street, how a town in Tulsa, a part of Tulsa, you had a black community there that was doing really well, and when the whites got mad, they basically burn them all to the ground, and now here's another case, and these aren't all isolated cases. There's plenty of cases just like this where black people were progressing and they were destroyed either by the KKK or just racist people in the community that doesn't want anybody else to shine. So next time you think about how come black people aren't successful, it could be that they're working at a disadvantage because their ancestors, when they were become successful, got killed or run out of town or what, or who knows what, you know.
Take a look at the politicians on this poster of the 1889 North Carolina House of Representatives. Here at the bottom are black Republican representatives, some from Wilmington. North Carolina also sent 4 black Republicans to the U.S. Congress between 1875 and 1899. The Democratic and Republican parties of 1898 in many ways occupied opposite parts of the political spectrum than they do today.
Most African Americans were voting for the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party was white voters almost exclusively. White supremacy was the central focus of the platform for the Democratic Party.
Republicans in North Carolina were successful in part because of a third party called the Populist Party, made up of mostly white farmers fed up with the tough economic times. North Carolina populists joined up with Republicans to form what they called the Fusion Party. And in the elections of 1894 and 1896, the Fusion Party defeated the Democrats in sweeping victories statewide. That meant North Carolina now had a government that shared power between black and white politicians, including a newly elected Republican governor. Together, they moved towards reforms that would favor black Americans and working class whites.
This was something that the Democratic Party folks were simply not going to accept.
A multiracial government wasn't just a disappointment for Democrats. It was more like a humiliation. They needed a plan to take back control of the state in the next election. So party leaders like Furnifold Simmons, future U.S. Senator, Charles Aycock, future North Carolina governor, and this man, Alfred Moore Waddell, came up with one: to beat the Fusion Party by luring white populist voters away from their alliance with black voters. Wilmington, with a large black population and a local fusion government in power, would be a focus of their campaign. The state Democratic Party handbook for 1898 laid out their goal: consolidate the white vote by stoking white anger and resentment. It said, "This is a white man's country, and white men must control and govern it."
Now, this is in the 1800s, and even though a lot has changed, you still got people like this that think that this is a white country and it's for white people. This is why they hate immigrants, because they're dark. Just point out. I'm just being 100% with it. You know, if immigrants were white, ain't no issue. But you got these immigrants like these Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, and they're black. You know, if they were white, no issue. But since they're black, man, they gotta go. They're here legally, but hey, you know what? They gotta go. They're too dark. You got Latino people, mostly people of color, and yet they gotta go. Whether they come here legally or illegally, whatever. The issue is not about that. It's are you the right color? If you ain't the right color, you gotta go. And it's mainly fueled by this white replacement theory that, hey man, they're gonna replace us. If we let too many of them in, we're gonna be white people is gonna be the minority, and we can't have that. So we got to think about the future. You know, that's what fuels this anti-immigration campaign. And if you disagree with me, let me know what's your argument for not letting immigrants in here. I want to hear your argument, because if you were in their shoes, if you were born in Haiti, Gaza, Afghanistan, anywhere, and somebody told you, hey, you got to stay your ass there. You can't move to the United States or anywhere. You got to stay there. Would you stay there, or would you bounce? You know, majority of people, they're gonna bounce, because that's human nature. That wherever you're born, hey, if you can't live there, you're gonna move. That's true of everyone. Unless you're telling me, hey man, if you're born into misery, you're gonna stay miserable. You know, which I highly doubt. But who knows? Maybe that's who you are. Maybe you're a person that you're born poor and you're just gonna stay poor your whole life. You know. All right, let me see this.
You get better when you're not blamed.
Their most effective tool was the media. One of North Carolina's biggest newspapers was a Democratic Party mouthpiece. It ran racist political cartoons throughout 1898.
Not everybody was literate in 1898, but to see a political cartoon of the type that ran, you may not be able to read it, but you know exactly what it means.
Many of the cartoons were centered on the threat of Negro rule, even though the fusion government was mostly white. They also played up another fear.
Black men threatening white women became a theme. White men need to do all that they can to protect white womanhood.
This was all part of North Carolina Democratic strategy, but it echoed the national racist rhetoric of the time.
This is the same thing that happened in Tulsa. The whole purpose of the riot was because allegedly a black man assaulted a white woman. So that's why they burned that part of the town down.
In one speech that Democrats printed in a Wilmington paper, a prominent Georgia writer named Rebecca Felton said,
If it takes lynching a black man a day to protect white womanhood, I say lynch.
Her speech prompted a Wilmington black man named Alex Manley, owner of the Black-run Daily Record newspaper, to respond with a column. He made a simple observation that, at the time, was shocking.
That white women who had liaisons with black men did so voluntarily and enthusiastically.
Manley wrote, "Every Negro lynched is called a big burly black brute, when in fact many were sufficiently attractive for white girls to fall in love with them."
Manley pretty much said, in a nutshell, sometimes white women choose to be with black men.
Manley's editorial became another tool for Democrats. Newspapers reprinted it, called it a horrid slander, and ran comments about it on a daily basis. It was just a few months before the
You can't have that. You can't have a white woman with a black man or any person of color.
election, and white voters were angry.
By the time the election rolls around on November 8th, black voters, Republican voters, had been thoroughly intimidated here.
By all accounts, the elections of 1898...
And I'm going to tell you this much right now. I know these racists hate it nowadays when they see a white woman with somebody who's not white. I just know they hate it. That's why every time I see it, I'm like, man, go get it, you know. Any kind of interracial dating, I'm always like, man, go ahead, man, fight against the norm.
Were a sham. The Democratic Party had a paramilitary group called the Red Shirts. They attacked and blocked black residents from voting. At a rally just before the election, Alfred Moore Waddell provoked the crowds. He said, "Negro office holding ought at once and forever be brought to an end, even if we have to choke the current of the Cape Fear River with carcasses." The votes were counted and the Democrats won.
Democratic candidates won every seat they had a candidate up for election in.
But some local fusionist politicians remained in power because their seats hadn't been up for re-election, like the white Republican mayor and the board of aldermen. And of course, the election did nothing to undo the economic power black folks held in the city. The Democrats had won the election, but their goal of total white supremacist control remained out of reach.
And so they engineered what was essentially a coup d'etat.
The day after the election, at a gathering for white men in Wilmington, the Democrats unveiled a document called the White Declaration of Independence. It contained an ultimatum. Cynthia Brown, whose descendants were in Wilmington back in 1898, is a historian at her church where there's a preserved copy of the Declaration from the next day's newspaper.
"We will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin."
They would strip black men of voting rights. They would give white men a large part of the employment heretofore given.
See, and a lot of this hatred of black people, and I saw this during the Obama administration. People would tell me that they hate Obama, and I'm like, what do you hate about him? And they could never come up with something. They're like, oh, you know what? Because he's a horrible president. Horrible on what? Well, you know, he's just so horrible. And I'm like, man, just say it, man. Quit being pussy with it. Tell me how you really feel. Quit hiding behind all of these, hiding behind like political correctness, and just say how you really feel, you know. But nah, they always try to make it look like, oh, no, I'm not racist. I just hate him because of blank. Because I was like, all right, do you also hate this person because they're doing the same thing? Nah, but that's different. You know, nah. It's racism. It's still around here. And the reason I talk about it is just so you know that it never went away, you know. And if you're a person of color, you know, keep this in the back of your head always.
To black men. And as for Alex Manley, we demand that he leave this city forever within 24 hours. The next morning, hundreds of white men marched to the offices of the Daily Record. Manley was gone. He had fled to save his own life. They set the Daily Record building on fire. This is where it once stood.
Once the white leadership destroyed Alex Manly's printing press, they destroyed one way in which the African American community in Wilmington could organize itself and keep itself informed.
At City Hall, the mayor and board of aldermen were forced out.
There's 200 armed men in City Hall at the time. They didn't do it of their own free will. And as they resigned, a new member selected by the Democratic.
See, yeah, of course they didn't do it of their own free will. And this is what I brought up in my other point of the Mexican-American War. I made how Mexicans were forced to sign over the land we call now America, the southern western states. And I had somebody argue, well, they signed it over. They signed it over. Oh yeah, like just magically they decided one day, yeah, we're just gonna sell it. Oh, don't you mean that, hey, American forces killed thousands of Mexicans, went all the way to Mexico City and made them sign it? Yeah, they don't talk about that part. They were like, hey, no, they signed it fair and square. There was no, they were never forced, this and that. Yeah, man, get out of here with that nonsense.
Party was voted into office.
Waddell, who once threatened to fill the Cape Fear River with black bodies, was the new mayor of Wilmington. Meanwhile, the mob had grown to about 2,000 men, and the violence spilled into the streets. In these photos, X's mark where the first black residents were killed.
The stories are that they were dumped into the river, and there are varying stories about how many people were killed.
I see 40 to 60 clearly as fatalities as a result of the violence, but I think it was higher.
Many black residents hid for days in the swamps and the wooded cemeteries in the city, including Cynthia's great-grandmother. And thousands of other residents fled Wilmington, never to return. Shortly afterward, Democrats printed booklets celebrating a glorious victory, and in the newspapers depicted black residents as the instigators.
This image is
Of course, because history is written by the victor. This is when you learn American history, just know that you're learning a biased point of history. And if you want to be fair, you should learn history from other points of views to see, you know what, maybe America isn't always right. Maybe America, maybe they've done some shady things, and every time they go to war or every time they do something, maybe we're not always the good guys, I don't know, maybe. Just I would hold opinion until you hear both sides of the story, But nah, we hear an extremely biased point of view when it comes to history.
Gross misrepresentation of what actually happened during 1819. What you see is African American men with guns, not white men with machine guns.
You can sell this $5 spatula on Amazon and compete with hundreds of other spatula sellers.
The city never regained its black majority population. Jim Crow laws like literacy tests and poll taxes that prevented black people from voting were immediately enacted.
See, you had a city that was highly progressive, and who's to say what would have happened if this coup d'etat never happened? Same thing with the Black Wall Street. Who's to say how progressive that town could have been if it wasn't destroyed? And this is all across the U.S. If they were given a chance, what would have happened? But people don't think about that. They think, these they never progress. They're just lazy and blah blah blah. It's like yeah.
And Wilmington's spirit of black opportunity was crushed. Black political representation in the state was over. It would be 90 years until North Carolina elected its next black Congress member.
Wilmington did a really great job of covering up a very dark past for a very long time.
Over the years, the textbooks on North Carolina's history have struggled to accurately describe what happened in 1898. This one from 1933 says the situation was unfortunate for both races. And this one from 1978 doesn't have that much more detail. But they both praise Charles Aycock, a politician who helped perpetrate the riot. They say he had a keen mind and a kind heart, and that, in fact, he was one of the best friends that the colored people had in the state.
I was the greatest president for blacks. You hear that before? Have you heard that before? You know?
It's a legacy that North Carolina has yet to fully undo. The names of the perpetrators are on Wilmington school buildings and city parks. But
And then they wonder why people want to change certain things named after certain people. It's like, hey man, if somebody did something shady, yeah, we got to change their names. It's like, what if it was named Epstein, Education Center or something, after Jeffrey Epstein? Like, okay, you know what, we got to change it because we can't be associated with him or with Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein or whoever, Yeah, man, just because you named it after somebody, if their past comes out that person wasn't who you thought they were, yeah, man, by all means, change it. This is why you got to be careful when you start naming things after people.
the legacy is also bigger than those names. Turn on the news, and the state's long history of political suppression echoes.
Return to a strict new voter ID law in North Carolina. Racial gerrymandering and a push for new voting maps.
The court says the Republican-led legislature redrew congressional districts along racial lines, violating the Constitution.
There's a tremendous amount of intimidation that is still felt by the black community.
It doesn't have to be mass mayhem and violence in the streets.
The strategy shifts towards designing state laws in such a way that you could exclude blacks from voter participation.
The subliminal pursuit of continuing the white Declaration of Independence.
And if you don't see it for what it really is, it can happen all over again.
All right, that's this. And over here, it talks about the massacre of Tulsa, Black Wall Street. Yeah, so don't ever think that the reason that people aren't, certain communities aren't, successful is because they're lazy or whatnot, or because they're dumb. Nah, just look into their past. How many times have they been screwed over and over and over? And it's not just about black people, Latinos, we've been screwed over so many freaking times. Native Americans probably got screwed over the most. So it's this is a good argument for those people who are racist, although this isn't for those people, because those people, no matter what, is going to go in one ear at the other. That you can't change those people's minds. So this video is really about for those who just want to make a better argument and just have this in the back of your mind of why you are maybe in the position that you are, and why it's hard to progress, because you'll always have those people that no matter what you do, how hard you work, no matter what, they're gonna hate you. They're gonna always hate you because of most likely because of the color of your skin. That's why I when I talk about immigration, I say legal immigration, illegal immigration, the topic is irrelevant, because even when we talk about legal immigration, they don't want you here. Why? Because you're different. And anytime that you're different, they're not gonna want you, point blank, period, even if it's 100% legal. Like, look at the legal immigration from California to Texas. U.S. citizens moving from one state to the other. You have all these Texans saying, we can't have these Californians moving over here. They're gonna change our state up with all their liberal propaganda, this and that. Hey, look, bro, it's legal. They're not, they're U.S. citizens moving from one state to the other. What's the problem? It's if they're different. If you are different, they're always gonna hate you. They're always gonna figure out a way to try to discriminate. So just keep that in mind, and let me know your thoughts. I'm off to the next video.